Well, alright, it is time to get started with another painting here. Brandon coming at you from the studio slash gallery I've got going on. So recently I did an all acrylic painting of this little harvest scene, my first attempt at doing pumpkins next to an old red barn. This was all acrylics with brushes. Pretty happy with the way these turned out. I decided based off of that to give a similar scene a go, all with palette knife this time in oil paints. So there is my end result of that. This is all palette knife painting, oil paints, and now we're going to have a look at the video of this. So if you want to see how we get this done with all palette knife, let's give it a go. Alright, so what I've got here is an 8x8 square canvas, stretched canvas here. This was actually given to me by somebody. So it's the only one that I've got square like this. And I'm going to start this project here by making a little line through here. It's essentially going to be where the bottom of my red barn wood is going to end. And I'm going to start scraping in just some of this gray color here. This is mostly just white, titanium white and black, just to give me a little base of these barn boards that I'm going to be putting in here. And this is oil paint again, so when I start bringing in the red on top of this, we're going to have a little bit of blending and mixing going on with this at the bottom for sure. But I'm just trying to kind of get an idea now of where the bottom of these boards are going to be. And I'm just going to put this color in using this palette knife. And I'm not going to cover up much of the canvas with this. Really just this bottom part of where these boards are going to stop is all I'm really going to do. And once I get enough of this color on the canvas here, I will switch over to the red color that will be the bulk of the boards themselves. So I'm just continuing to fill this color in now. I'm switching over here to the red. This is mostly red mixed with some burnt umber, giving it a dark red appearance that I'm putting in, and I'm putting darker tones in at the moment that's got a little bit more of the burnt umber with it. Now I'm bringing in some lighter red color with it, because again this is all going to mix together being oil paints. Once I get all this color on the canvas, I'll be able to push it around a little bit with this palette knife and blend it together, but I want a mix of lighter and darker values in here. That way it's not all monotone looking. So I've got some dark areas and some lighter areas that I'm putting in. And right now it's really just about covering the canvas here with these colors, getting them up there, that way I can begin to move them around and manipulate them how I want. Which is the reason why I picked oil paint for this particular project. Acrylic paint, I put it on like this and it would just dry too fast for me to be able to continue to move it and manipulate it once it's on the canvas. So I chose oil paints for this project. This is only the third palette knife painting I have ever attempted. And I wanted to try another one because I do like the way that using the palette knife almost kind of forces the issue a little bit for me of not being able to focus on detail work and relying a little bit more on the impressionistic side of things. And so I get a lot more texture using the palette knife, and I get a lot more of an impressionistic overall feel to the piece when I'm done. And since I really liked the harvest scene that I did with the acrylic painting and the brush, I wanted to come in here and try a similar scene with this palette knife to see what my end results were. So that's the reason why I'm doing this. And now I've got pretty good coverage of the red on here, so you can see now I'm just dragging the strokes more vertically to make the appearance of boards. Now I'm moving to this corner area where I'm going to put a hay bale in. I am basically just darkening this little corner area up because I want to create a background right here for where I'm going to put a hay bale down. So I just mixed in a lot more of the burnt umber here, maybe a touch of black into this, and I'm just scraping this color essentially onto the canvas in this corner to give me a dark background color that I can come back and create my hay bale on once I get to that stage in the game anyway. But that's all I'm really doing here, is putting in some dark background color on top of this corner area. And we will have to play around with the hay bale here and the foreground hay itself once we get to that point, in terms of mixing the lights and darks back and forth to create the look that we want. Obviously I've done it with the acrylics or the brush, so I know that process, but this is going to be a little bit different with these wet on wet oil paints using this palette knife. I'm going to have to see how things play out in terms of being able to get it to look the way we want, individual highlights of straw and hay in here. But I know I'm going to need this dark background, so that's what we're putting in here. Now I want to scrape out an area where my pumpkin is going to go. And this is just basically kind of scraping away any excess paint right here, giving me an idea of where my pumpkin is going to land. So really I'm just kind of making an area. Now I'm going to bring in, this is mostly some yellow ochre on top of that red that's back there that'll create a really dark value of an orange back there that'll be a good base for the back of the pumpkin. So I'm bringing in some yellow ochre here and just kind of giving the basic shape, overall outline of where this pumpkin is going to land at this point. Just trying to get a feel for the overall composition in terms of where everything's going to be placed. Adding a little bit more of the burnt umber here at the bottom because I want the bottom of this pumpkin to be darker, where it's kind of sitting down close to the ground. And again, these colors are all going to be blended in, hopefully anyway, a little better once we get to actually detailing this pumpkin out a little bit. But the bottom now is a little darker. We're going to move here into the same dark background color for all of the hay along the ground in the foreground as I did with that hay bale. So I'm basically bringing in a lot of black and burnt umber in here, just a touch of titanium white now to lighten that mix up a little bit. That way I can bring some darker tones really close to the bottom of the canvas to make it look a little closer to the foreground. So I lightened up the mix just a little bit here and filling in where the ground is going to be. Now I am laying in the individual lines between the boards of this barn back here. And what I'm doing is I got a tiny little roll of paint, which is a darker value of red. It's mostly the burnt umber itself and some red, and I'm using along the edge of the palette knife that I am just touching to this canvas to create the lines of the gaps between the boards is what this is going to be. So I'm creating these vertical lines back here by touching the edge of this palette knife in. It's got just a little bit of paint along the edge of the knife itself as I scrape it along the palette down there. And once I get these initial lines put in, which is just mostly burnt umber here, maybe a hint of red in it, I will come back with a little bit of black and try to come into some of these areas and just darken up a few places to create a little bit sharper gap between some of these boards. So right now I'm bringing that black in where I'm touching it in a few places. It's not, all the way through, just in a few areas, just to create a little bit more separation from one board to the other here. and that will give us our appearance of individual boards on the barn back there. Now I am going to detail out these boards a little bit with some wood grain texturing. Starting with my darker values here, I'm bringing in a little bit more of that red mix with more burnt umber in it to make it a little darker value than what I've got on the wood up there already. And I am just using the tip of this palette knife to just touch in tiny little areas of what will look like more wood grain. And I'm going to do this in a variety of places around each of these boards. I'm not going to do it on all of the board for full coverage of this. I'm just doing it in a few random places, and then I'm also going to come back in with a little bit lighter value of the red. That way I've got some lighter highlights and these darker highlights together. And so that is how I'm going to create a little bit more detail on my barn wood back here to make it look a little bit weathered, a little bit older. So here I'm now just touching in that darker value using the tip of the knife, basically just kind of dropping in a little bit of color, using the tip to draw some vertical lines in there. Small little vertical lines, look like splintered wood, or areas where the grain is a little more apparent or evident, can be seen. And you can do this as little as you want or as much as you want to create as much detail on this background as you like. I did add a little bit of what looked like a circular knot in the wood there in that one board, just to mix it up a little bit. And so this is just a process of detailing these boards out as much as you want to give it the appearance that you like. I like things to have a little bit of a realistic feel to them, even though, again, this is not quite as detailed out as what I would be able to accomplish with, let's say, a liner brush or some smaller brushes at this point. I am going to try to use the tip of this palette knife to do as much of this work as I can. Just gives the overall finished picture a better look, in my opinion. Now we've pretty much got our dark values in, so now I'm starting here with the lighter values, mostly towards the bottom of some of these boards here. I'm bringing a little bit lighter reds now, almost to a pinker kind of shade here, where some of this paint on these boards has faded and chipped and peeled off maybe over time. I had a few random places of it around somewhere where the original darker highlights were, so you have some contrast from dark to lighter values in some areas. I won't put as much of this light highlight color in as I did the darker stuff, though. So I'm just going to put it in a few more places to finish these boards out, and then we will call the background barn wood pretty much completed and finished once I get the rest of these lighter highlights in. Now I'm focusing again here back on this hay bale, so bringing in a little bit lighter color here that I can move around, start to create some textures back here of lighter and darker values, just to get a feel for how this is going to work. And I'm going to be able to put these highlights of hay and straw in. And all I'm doing now is just using the tip of this knife to create some textures in there and some lines. Doing the same thing here along the ground, basically just scraping along a little bit lighter value here and there, and then using the tip of the knife to move some paint around, adding a little bit darker values now to, again, the very bottom of the canvas here, which will be the closest foreground. The darker values here make it the appearance of it's a little bit closer to you. And again, just moving some paint around using the tip of the knife to create some textures there. Now that we've got a pretty good idea of how the ground is going to work and how the hay bale is going to play out, I'm going to move back into working on the pumpkin here. And right now this is just adding some more yellow ochre into this mix here and blending things in to start to orange things up a bit. Now that we've got a pretty good base here of the pumpkin, I'm going to start lightening up my values a little bit. And I've switched to a slightly smaller palette knife at this point. Now we're going to bring in some more medium yellows and start applying this color and moving things around so we can start lightening our orange up here and start creating some contrast. We're trying to get the appearance of, obviously, the we're trying to get the appearance of the pumpkin here, where it's got these lines that run from pole to pole that are darker. So I'm going to put this light color up here, and once I get some lighter paint on the canvas, then we can continue to push it around with the palette knife and fade and blend and mix things however we need to. But right now it's about placing some color on here, getting some lighter color in place that we can work with. And all I'm really doing here is mixing in more medium yellow, really. So you can see when I put it on there, it's a little bit brighter than the rest, but again, once you start dragging this color around and moving it, you're going to pick up some of that yellow ochre and even some of that red from the original barnwood back there behind it. So as you drag this color around, you'll see that it will fade out and blend out into that color that's beneath it. And we're essentially going to just keep doing this here until we get good color across this entire pumpkin. At least it's starting to look a little more orange at this point, which is good. We don't want a red pumpkin up there. We want an orange pumpkin up there, so we're going to keep blending this in. Keeping my palette knife strokes in the direction of the lay of the pumpkin here, so to speak, so things will go the way we want. Obviously, it would look weird if you were taking this palette knife and making horizontal passes with it. That's not the look that you're going for, so it would be very difficult to create the look that we want. Now this is some pretty much pure medium yellow here right in the middle. Gives a little brighter color. dark area here for the stem. This is mostly just some burnt umber to drop in what will be the stem. We'll put a few little touches of lighter highlight color on top of this once we get all of the dark stuff that we want down. A little bit of highlight on top of that now, just touching in some titanium white along with that burnt umber. Alright, so what I am continuing to do right now is work on highlighting this pumpkin out to make it look like we want it to look. So really it's just a matter of me bringing in some lighter colors and some different shades of colors here to create those ridges and the lines running down the pumpkin itself. So I am still just kind of trial and error doing this here with these colors, because again, this is my first attempt at a palette knife painting of a pumpkin like this. So trying to get these colors where I want them and blend them the right way is a little bit of stick it on here and see what happens, and if it doesn't turn out the way I want it to turn out, I try something else. And obviously, this being oil paint, everything is still wet and it blends and it smears together, so that is a good thing to a certain extent, but also can be a bad thing because I keep dragging maybe colors that I don't want back into some areas, so I have to start over. But you get more of an impressionistic look, obviously, with this technique than what I do when I'm using my brushes. So to that extent, I like the technique and I like working with the palette knife because it creates a completely different feel on a finished painting than what I would be achieving with brushes at this point. So I wanted to give another one of these a go and see what I come up with. So right now I'm trying to create these lines on this pumpkin, and I'm getting there, I guess. So yeah, I'm continuing to work these colors in to create the overall look that I'm going for, and I want my pumpkin to be a little darker along the bottom where it's sitting on the ground. Really, this is just a matter of playing around with these colors on here until you get a result that you're happy with. So I'm going to continue to play around with the lights and the darks here, move them around, which is the good thing about using this oil paint. Again, I can continue to manipulate it since it stays wet for a long period of time. I can keep moving it around with my palette knife and pushing the colors to a certain extent where I want them. Well, we're definitely getting somewhere now. We're getting to a point where things are looking a little bit recognizable. So really it's just a matter of dropping in some highlight colors here and there. So we're going to put some highlight colors in. We're going to use a little bit of titanium white, a little bit of medium yellow. We're going to thin the color down a good bit so we can drop it in on top of what we've got in there. And I'm just thinning it down with some odorless paint thinner. And that's just so I can drop it on top of the wet that I've already got in there. And once we've gotten our paint on the canvas there, obviously we can continue it again to move it around, blend it a little bit, and do what we need to do with it. So I can come in here and touch that along the top. If I don't want that color to go up quite so high, and fade that in a little bit better. There we go. I'm going to try to maybe blend my edges just a little better. All right, now I think we need to work on our ground here and our hay that we're going to be putting in. The first thing I want to do is darken up the area underneath, essentially back there where the barnwood is kind of hanging above the ground back there. I want to create a dark shadow back in there. About like that. Now we got to figure out how to get our hay in here the way we want it. So this is going to be a little tricky, probably. Going to be a back and forth process of dealing with dark and light colors. So the first thing I'm going to try is come in with some lighter color and see where we land in terms of can I get this in here looking like hay or not. Basically touching the canvas with the edge of the knife where I've got a little paint roll in there. And that seems to be working fairly well. Again, you're going to end up with a much more impressionistic look with this style of painting than you would with the brush. So I'm not as concerned about exact detail of how every little individual straw here turns out on this making some hay here. Now I am going to create obviously a hay bale to some extent over here, so this is going to be a little different on this side. I want to create a square looking bale, and just to give me an idea of where I'm going to be going, I'm going to try to put in a couple of edges just to form my overall shape here. I think it's going to be something like that. So we'll have the top up there. And then we'll have kind of a front section of our hay bale facing towards the pumpkin right over here. And then we'll have the side facing the viewer will be here. And then there's going to be maybe a little bit darker area right here at the edge of this hay bale where it's sitting. So we're going to drop in some darker color there. Right along that edge, there we go. That's pretty good. Now I think we just need to come in with some various values of our hay color and our straw color here and keep doing what we're doing. Using the edge of the knife. This is mostly some yellow ochre, some titanium white. Maybe give ourselves a little darker straw and hay color in there. And I'm essentially going to be laying in these colors all in a fairly flat horizontal looking manner at the moment. I may turn the palette knife here and add a few at some different angles, but for right now I'm just going to keep touching this color in at mostly this horizontal direction. Now on this front we're going to turn the palette knife. So now maybe I'll do the same down here. And now turn it another direction here. Alright, now we're just going to have to lighten up our value here. A little more titanium white put in there. See if I can create some edges on our hay bale. It's a little flatter on the top, obviously. And we've got some kind of a corner right in here, maybe. Now I think all we have left is to lay in our brightest highlight color of our straw. I'm going to go with a slightly smaller palette knife so I can really use the edge of it, get in a lot more titanium white. And really now I'm just touching in a variety of different directions. This lighter highlight color. give us the impression of pieces of straw and hay sticking out everywhere. A few almost pure titanium white highlights along these edges that I'm going to touch in, and then drag the palette knife through them just to create a little bit of brighter highlight along those areas where this hay bale has got corners. It just helps define that shape a little bit. Okay, we're getting somewhere. Looks like a bale of hay to me, right? Let's put in a few more. Put in a few more brighter pieces along the top here. And a couple of random ones in the middle. All right, now if we can replicate that along the ground, I think we'll be doing something. Maybe I want to define my edges just a little bit more here. So I'm pretty happy with the way that is looking. Get a few pieces that overlap over the base of that pumpkin there. That's pretty good, I think. Pretty good. Maybe I need just a few more. Brighter highlights along the very top of this bale over here. Just to make the top of that stand out a little bit more than the rest. So I'd say at this point, I think it's pretty much finished. I'm going to put a signature on this thing and call it done. So there's my first attempt at a palette knife painting pumpkin harvest scene based off of, obviously, this one that I did with a brush. So there it is. I did that one is all done with acrylics and a brush. This is all oil paints with a palette knife. There we have it, finished product, full palette knife painting of the pumpkin harvest scene. Hope you enjoyed that one.